Hello and welcome to part 4 of a very special 7-part series where we've asked the question, what would the lineup of the greatest ever F1 team look like? From race engineer to team principal, lead driver to chief designer, and even the rarely coveted number 2 driver spot. We've set out to build an F1 team made up of the best there has ever been. Our in-house panel of motorsport experts across Autosport, motorsport.com and GP Racing have all picked individuals throughout history that they believe are the greatest of all time. And in this series, we'll be discussing the careers and the worthiness of the individuals that have made it into the top 3 for each job role. And once again, I'm joined by our engineering and design experts, Ben Anderson, Giorgio Piola, and Jake Boxall-Legge. Thanks very much for joining me again, guys. So you already helped us get our chief designer in place. But Jake, what are we saying is different about what a technical director does versus a chief designer?
So a chief designer is the person who dictates the design of the car. The technical director is, I think Pat Simmons once described it as kind of the conductor of an orchestra. You have to be able to understand everything within the team, everything on the car. You coordinate the build and the design of the car. You have to work with suppliers and partners and just essentially bring everything together. You have to be the person, that point man, the person who brings the car together, who makes a concept on a computer into a reality, into the car that hits the track. And then once it's there, you have to coordinate the development of that car as well. So it's a hugely important role.
Absolutely. And the person that we're going to speak about first and who is third on our list in third position is probably he's very much synonymous with the team that he currently still works for, and I think is safe to say is probably the father of this role. And that is, of course, Patrick Head, chief designer and part owner of Williams, who then moved into the role of technical director in the 1980s. And which obviously alongside Frank Williams saw massive success in the 80s and 90s, helping oversee the team rise to third on the all-time winners list in F1 and second in terms of titles. Again, we're talking about men with some incredible CVs, are we not?
Yes, I believe that Patrick, for me, is really the number one as a technical director. First of all, because I'm a little bit older than the young guys here together with me, and he was the teacher of all Formula One technical director and chief designer. Because even Ross Brawn, Adrian Newey, Paddy Lowe, Neil Otley, Frank Derny, everybody, they start with him. Nearly all the chief designer, near all the technical director in Formula One, they start with him. And he was not only a wonderful engineer, but he was the man able to coordinate the other people. He must be also very strong in understanding the roles of the people. And I remember very often one sentence that he said many times to me. He said, Giorgio, if we have a group of people and one of this group of people wants to do 120% because he believed to be a genius, he believed to be better than everybody else, he destroyed the group. Everybody has to work 80, maximum 19%, and then the total of all the work of every people coordinating in a good way makes 100%, make the success. So for me, Patrick Head was really the man that created all the standard of Formula One engineer that now we appreciate. Nothing to take away from Ross Brawn, because again, Ross is very wonderful in doing this. Ross is very able to put the right people in the right place and to coordinate. And again, this is the best technical director, but for me, Patrick Head is the father.
Yeah, I broadly agree with that. He's definitely the godfather of technical directors, and he's kind of a pioneer in the role. Obviously, he did a good job as a car designer himself early doors at Williams, and really transformed that team from really a customer car shambles into a genuine, proper world championship team. And then, worked so closely with Adrian Newey through that extraordinary success period in the 90s for Williams. But the thing that maybe goes against Patrick in terms of the ranking is perhaps what came after that. Newey was obviously ambitious to progress, wanted to be a technical director in his own right. Perhaps Williams and Patrick Head could have found a way to get out of Newey's way, and maybe that success could have carried through into the 2000s. Williams declined really after the turn of the millennium. They had the BMW engine deal, probably the best engine in Formula One at that time, and Patrick admits the cars just weren't up to scratch. They didn't match the potential of the engine, and I just wonder if they could have found a way to keep that Head-Newey partnership going a bit longer, whether actually we might have seen a different story for Williams and even more success than they managed.
I mean, we got very used to Williams being that successful in the 80s and 90s, but looking back now, is it all the more remarkable that it was that dominant at times?
I don't know. I think what Patrick Head had as a technical director was such a good understanding of everything that a Formula One car needed. And I think at the start of the 80s as well, I think is a particularly salient example of that. Obviously, Lotus was the team that pioneered ground effects, but it couldn't really grasp that understanding because Colin Chapman kept wanting to, okay, I've invented that. What's my next idea? And Patrick Head led the Williams team to say, okay, we've got this really good idea. How do we extract the maximum out of it? And so Williams is a hugely competitive force at the start of the 80s. And it continued that through the 80s as well, when, the technical landscape was changing, went through turbo engines, and Williams got to deal with Honda, for example. Obviously, that sort of fell away when Williams had that weird year in, I think it was 1988 with the Judd engines. But Williams then picked up again. They had the foresight to pick up the Renault engine, and Patrick Head again got the right people on board, did what his remit of technical director was, which was, again, conduct this orchestra. And you had Paddy Lowe on, the active suspension. You had Adrian Newey designing these very complex and intricate aerodynamics. He was able to just conduct it so well. And as Ben said, it was a shame that he wasn't able to keep the band together, because I think if they had past 1997, they could have really gone on to some amazing things.
Yeah, I think they're all very valid points and kind of links to who we have in second place. And it's probably a good job that he's in second place because he's already part of our team as our chief designer. So he would have had a lot of work to do if he had to do both roles. And that is, of course, Adrian Newey. And as you've said, we can link the Williams success to Newey too. And as we've pointed out, that maybe it was Newey's ambition that kind of broke the band up. But why do we think maybe that Newey was voted as more suited to the chief designer role than Patrick Head, even if, having had the conversation, we maybe don't agree with the ranking?
I think maybe it's a function of what I was talking about before in terms of his ambition. He's not alone in the history of Formula One as a designer or technical director who's kind of clashed with the management teams he's worked with. He was so successful at Williams, and as I said, he wanted to really take Patrick Head's job and couldn't do that. He then, is coveted by McLaren. He goes to that team. It doesn't take long before he falls out with Ron Dennis. I accept that's not a very difficult thing to do, and he's not alone in that camp. And it's really only at Red Bull, I think, that he's found his proper feet, a proper balance between what he wants to do, how he wants to work, and working in harmony with the other people around him in the senior leadership teams. And as a technical director, you can't always just do what you want or get your own way. As the others have mentioned, it's about conducting the orchestra. It's about being a team player. It's about recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of others. And it's also about how you deal with your higher ups to get what you need for your team below you. And I just don't think, if you look at the span of Newey's career, that he's always had necessarily the traits that best suit that role. He is better when he's looking at the car and working out how to make the car better and faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are probably many people in roles that have worked their way up, where actually they were better at being more operational than administrative. But what, just for the people at home, is there an easy way for us to separate Newey's successes as a designer and as a technical director?
I think so. I think what you can look at, I think, is McLaren. He was much more primarily focused as a technical director, especially in the latter half of his time there. And obviously, as I mentioned in the chief designers section, he was vastly competitive at the start, and he was, penciling all these fantastic designs and getting around the regulations. But as the role became more technical director influence, as Ben said, he did clash a lot more. And this was at a time in, I think, between, I'd say, 2001 and 2005, for example, there was a lot of sort of internal struggling. The Mercedes engines at the time weren't particularly reliable. There was the disaster of the MP418 in 2003, which never made it in a race because the car was so it was unreliable. The aerodynamics were out of sync. The drivers kept crashing it. It wasn't a particularly successful period in the team's life. And I remember speaking to Paddy Lowe about this, actually, and he was angling for the technical director job at the time. And he's looking back on it, he said the problem with Adrian was that he wasn't focused enough on the reliability side of the car. And he was this fantastic designer, but as a chief designer, it was his way or the highway, and he didn't want to compromise on having, the leanest, meanest car when, there was a cooling requirement for the car to be reliable. So I think that those sorts of vested interest clashed a little bit.
Yeah, that's again very, very valid point. So Newey's going to have to settle for just being our chief designer, and he's going to have to answer to Ross Brawn, who is another man with plenty of experience in F1 with Williams, Haas Lola and Arrows before becoming technical director of Benetton in 91. And there, obviously, he won races and championships with Michael Schumacher. But he cemented his reputation, really, didn't he, when he moved to Ferrari? And again, it was that point of difference and that influence that helped turn the team into the dominant force that was the Schumacher Ferrari era. But not just with Ferrari, though, right? So Honda was on the right path before pulling out, and he proved it with his own team when he kept it alive and won the title in 2009. Now, a lot of people are going to remember Brawn for Brawn GP and 2009, but what for you guys are Brawn's crowning moments?
Well, for me, I think 2000s in Ferrari, isn't it? The extraordinary run with Schumacher, that triumvirate that we talked about in the previous segment. Brawn on the pit wall, devising a clever strategy to help Schumacher beat Häkkinen to another Grand Prix win. That, for me, is the period where he established himself as one of the leading lights in Formula One.
Yes, I do agree that the best moment of Ross, when he was able to manage his group, and together with Schumacher, he made the Ferrari winning for such a long time. This was wonderful, and this was all his ability to coordinate the people, to be able to even make the Italian part of Ferrari, or the engineer, working together with a group that he took from Benetton. This was a very wonderful work. And then he's also not only a wonderful engineer, not only a wonderful man in being able to coordinate the people, but he's also very trustful. For example, the 2009 car was only, the success of the Brawn GP was only about the double diffuser. And I do believe that only Ross Brawn could convince FIA and everybody that that solution was legal, because he is a wonderful, if you want, kind of lawyer, kind of diplomatic, and he was able to convince everybody.
There's so many "In Brawn We Trust" memes that I've seen across the internet. But Jake, what is it for you that makes him so special?
I think there are two examples. I think number one, in Benetton, he was surrounded by a lot of hugely strong personalities. You had Flavio Briatore. We know how flamboyant he is, yet so sort of such a huge personality. And you had Tom Walkinshaw as well. You had Rory Byrne on the design side. You had all of these sort of different players who had such strong personalities, and Ross Brawn was able to bring them all together and get them to work into almost a sort of unlikely group of people angling for a title. I think the key example is when he started at Ferrari in late 1996. The team was known for, it hadn't won a title in years. It was hugely political. The last few years had been, indicated by a lot of political wrangling within the team. And Ross Brawn did his sort of walk around the Maranello factory, and he was like, okay, I think I know what I need to do. The first thing that he did on joining Ferrari was he stopped all of the engineers and all of the people who worked at the team from reading La Gazzetta dello Sport, because all they saw every day was Ferrari this, Ferrari that, Ferrari is rubbish, that kind of thing. And he's like, I don't need this negativity in my team. I want everybody to stop focusing on what everybody else thinks and start focusing on what we need to do as a team. And he turned Ferrari around from being this team that was characterized by political wrangling into a team that was so dominant in the early 2000s. It was just that force of will, that force of character, the quiet yet firm demeanor that Ross Brawn has. So yeah, he was a fantastic man manager, knew what he needed to do to get a team working. So it's no surprise he's number one on this list.
Yeah, he has this sustained run of success, kind of magic touch wherever he goes as well. We talked about Benetton through to Ferrari, but then also, he moved into this kind of team principal role after Ferrari, taking on Honda. He was able to, have the foresight to see the 2009 regulations, have the foresight to see the 2009 regulations coming, and to set Honda up really for what would have been a championship run for them had they not pulled out. He was able to, still pull the rabbit out of the hat, running his own team as Brawn GP, which then obviously morphs into Mercedes Grand Prix. And we've seen what incredible success that team's gone on to, post him stepping down. But he really put in place a lot of the structure that team then carried on to glory, appointing people like Bob Bell, who James Allison rates as the best technical director he's worked under. So a massive influence from Brawn. He's kind of the titan, isn't he? Midas touch wherever he goes.
And is there any way for us to break down what that Midas touch was in 2009? Where did that come from?
It's a lot of things. I know Giorgio likes to say it was just the double diffuser, but there's so many things on that car. I can see Giorgio disagrees with this so much right now, but there was so many other things. I think the double diffuser, sure, that worked, but Williams had one, Toyota had one. They couldn't get it to sing, but Brawn was able to. But it also had, the sort of end plateless front wing, if you like. They were one of the first teams to cotton on that. With the new wider front wings, outwash was king. I think it was McLaren and Renault turned up for the first test with in-washing front wings, trying to bring airflow inwards through the tires, through the car and around the tires. And Brawn was like, that's stupid. And although they didn't have the money, they didn't have the capital to keep developing that car, it was fundamentally strong. And it kind of had a bit of a knock-on effect as well, because when Mercedes bought the team, it was quite late on in 2009. They hadn't had the money to sort of develop that car, and although it was a top four out of the top four teams, it wasn't quite on the same level. It was a mix of different things, and the fact that they had to shoehorn a Mercedes engine in so late in the day into that car, and it still worked and it still won the title, is a bit of a miracle, to be honest.
I think it'll definitely go down in history as one of the best one-shot wonders that there probably is ever going to be in Formula One. I can't think of many that can compete on that scale, bar maybe individual drivers and racers, but it's definitely something that impacted me as a fan watching, it was definitely something that was incredible to watch unfold. And it's a Cinderella story in some ways, and as you've said, has now led into the success of the Mercedes team. And he's then gone on from there to become Formula One's managing director of motorsport. So again, in that very much a leadership and guardian role of the sport, which, I mean, I don't know what you all think, but I think that's a great role for him, and I'm always looking forward to seeing how he's going to help form and change the sport. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but what do you think?
I think it's a sign of the esteem that Ross is held in by his peers, that when he decided to take up that role with Formula One, and it was offered to him to take up that role and try and transform Formula One to forge a new direction, radically change, the style of the cars and the form of the racing. You didn't have people with divided opinions. You didn't have anyone coming out going, "Ooh, that's a bad decision. Why have they appointed Ross to do that?" Pretty much everyone to a man was saying, this is a great move. As you mentioned, Jess, in Ross we trust.
Absolutely. Any refuting comments, or are we all in agreement here?
No, I totally agree, especially what you said about Ross. I only disagree about the Brawn GP of 2009. I'm still convinced that for me, the best car that year was the Red Bull RB5. They won even without the double diffuser. And if they could introduce the double diffuser before, there was no history, and Red Bull would have been the championship. Thank God for Brawn GP. Only Jenson Button scored all the victories. And okay, the car was full of other interesting ideas, as Jackie explained very well, and I totally agree. But again, for me, the best car that year was the RB5.
In which case,
Ross
and Brawn working together.
Yeah, it would be fantastic. But I believe Adrian will never work together with Ross. But again, I do believe Ross, for maybe he's right, is the best technical director. Of course, Patrick Head is the father of everybody. But if we have to make one person, maybe it's true, is correct. I totally agree with you. And Ross is the number one.
Well, I hope that Newey will work with Brawn, because Brawn is now Newey's boss in our team. So I hope that they can find common ground and have competition being their the bringer together of those two giants in the sport.
Hi, and welcome to all the race fans of motorsport.com. This is Ross Brawn. I just want to thank everyone for this tremendous accolade of the award for technical director, something that means a lot to me, very special. I think in these very difficult times we're facing at the moment, it's great to remember the fantastic times that we've had in Formula One, and indeed the fantastic times we're going to have in the future. And it gives us inspiration to fight our way through these difficult times. And Formula One was in a great place 6 months ago, and it's going to be in a great place in another 6 months. And this has really boosted me, and let's say very special. Great group of people you voted for so far. Certainly a team I would have been honoured to work with, and I look forward to seeing who the rest of the pieces of the jigsaw are. But thanks once again. Stay safe, stay well, and I look forward to seeing you all in the future. Many thanks.
I would say that the design side of our F1 team is looking pretty strong. Next up, it's time to appoint a driver. But before we get into our superstar champion in the making, we're looking for a perfect wingman. So make sure you join us for that. Thanks so much, guys, for being on the panel today and diving into the technical side of our team. And make sure you join us for the next episode, where, as I say, we're looking for a wingman. Thanks so much.